Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the new moon that is taking place in Capricorn on the 18th of January. So as you can see, this is very late in Capricorn, almost at 29 degrees of Capricorn. And the moon in Capricorn is in detriment. It's in the sign that is opposite to its ruling sign. So the moon rules Cancer, but it's in Capricorn. So this does give the tone here a bit of distance. It's a bit impersonal. It's ruled by Saturn as well. So both of the Saturn-ruled signs have a bit more to do with the world, collective affairs, plans, strategy, all of this practical kind of consideration. There's also a bit of a focus on tradition when we're in the Capricorn side of the two signs that are ruled by Saturn. So even though this is a new moon, in part because it's in Capricorn, but also because it's so late in the sign and because it's making this configuration, which we've been working with various planets, including Pluto a couple of years ago, this does seem to me like it's going to be looking a bit more backward, reviewing how things have gone and trying to consolidate and make plans of how to go forward based on what we've come from. So we're going to get into all of that. But in addition to this minor grand trine that we see this new moon creating, in addition to Mercury and Mars here, all of these planets are making this minor grand trine with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we have getting closer and closer in the late degrees of Pisces. Those two will conjunct exactly next month at 0 degrees of Aries. We're going to talk about that more soon. And then down to Uranus, which is wrapping up its time in Taurus as well. We also have this stellium of planets, a bunch of planets all really, really, really close together. From 3 degrees of Aquarius to 26 degrees of Capricorn. This is only about 7 degrees of distance here. So it's very, very, very close. All of these are technically an aspect to each other. I do definitely take the sign barrier to be very significant, but these are all building up to a bigger stellium, a more poignant stellium in Aquarius, where all of these planets, excluding the moon, they're all going to be in Aquarius, in the very first degrees of Aquarius. And so we're building up to that. But before we kick that off, and that's a real ignition point, that's a real new start point, we have this new moon that's looking at the energy that we're kind of coming out from. So there is a cathartic moment in a very, very busy few months where a lot of things are going to be shifting and changing in the world, in our own personal lives. We're going to be looking at reality as quite a bit different. By the end, say, when we get into March, things are going to be quite a bit different, and there's going to be different phases of this. But there's this weird, almost a breather that we get where we start to consolidate, we start to look over, especially the past 7 years or so of our lives since we've had Uranus in Taurus, which this is connected to quite closely. And so this is an opportunity to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff when it comes to that. Look at what we've learned and look at what's still going to be serving us, and then consider already the changes in the reality that we're dealing with in the world and in our own personal lives since the big changes that we've been experiencing from the beginning to the middle of January. Consolidate around that, make a plan to go forward for some bigger changes that are around the corner as well. So I wanted to point this one out. Even though it looks a little bit quiet, it's still a very significant point where I think it's going to be important for us to be aware of what's going on in the energy so we don't miss the moment, basically. So before we really dive into it, we're going to look at the collective perspective on this. We'll look at this from a global or political perspective, and then we'll take it through sign by sign. But before we do, if you do wind up enjoying this video, if you could give it a like or hype, I would really greatly appreciate that, as it helps to support the growth of the channel. So with that said, let's look at this from a collective perspective, just on the human level, what we're all going to be experiencing with this. There's a lot here about memory and tradition. These are all rather tradition, memory-oriented placements that are getting highlighted by this new moon. And I don't think I need to really make the case to anyone that the past several years have been weird and funky and challenging for a lot of people, I think because of the fact that we've had so many significant planets in passive signs. And that's what's going on here with the earth signs and the water signs. these are quite passive. And collectives in particular haven't quite known how to address some of the frustrations that we have, some of the disappointment that we have in the way that the world is going and the impact that the way that the world is going on our own personal plans and prospects and things like that. Now, this is all going to be shifting in this coming year. That's why it's about to get pretty loud. But we do have this moment where we are still in this kind of passive mode, and we're able to look back over all that we have picked up on from the past several years. So looking at all of the residues that have built up, trying to clear them out, the emotional and material patterns of the recent years. Have we gotten used to disappointment? Have we gotten kind of stuck in that mode? Do we feel a bit stuck in the mud? Like, well, whatever I try to do is going to get complicated. So let me kind of try to make as few moves as possible and see how things play out. It's very much been the mode for the past several years. And this new moon is offering us an opportunity to really look at that, especially any patterns formed since COVID in particular. So taking stock, pausing, catching our breath in this moment, and through taking stock, try to be willing to not hold on to the past, but rather to try to say goodbye to some patterns of thought, patterns of expectation, or this habitual kind of waiting pattern, or the suspended pattern, or feeling like you are in a holding pattern, basically. That's shifting very soon, I promise you. I know we've seen some of it start to shift a bit with populations in particular, collective populations starting to get a bit more active. It's going to get a lot more active as we go forward. And that's not just going to be out in the world and protests and pressuring governments and things like that. It's also going to be in our own personal lives where we're going to be a bit more in the driver's seat. So we're very soon to be awakened from this slumber, essentially, for good. And we're not going to go back to that kind of passive energy that we've had really in any of our own lifetimes. We're not going to have all of the outer planets all in passive signs for a very, very, very long time. So no more feeling stuck in the mud. And this is this kind of last moment to get this cathartic release, to reflect on how that has felt, to reflect maybe even on some of the patience that has engendered. There's always pros and cons to everything. I know it doesn't look like people have gotten good at emotional regulation in the world, but maybe we have on a personal level, trying to calm ourselves, trying to learn how to self-soothe, trying to learn how to deal with disappointments, roll with it, cope with it, move on to the next thing, and have that patience, basically. That's a really wonderful thing to have at the ready. It's a wonderful lesson to wind up taking with us, but it's only going to serve us so far. And the more that we are still in that mode of feeling stuck in the mud, still in the mode of, well, the expectations, the reward for raising those expectations, the reward for effort put in is so slow that we almost expect that there won't be a reward. That's the kind of energy that we are going to need to release to the extent that we can during this period of time. Again, I think that this is going to work on our memory quite a bit, which is interesting and kind of funky. We do have Jupiter in retrograde in the moon sign, and we are definitely speaking to a new lunar cycle that's kicking off because this is a new moon. So that is getting pinged in that way. It's not an aspect to anything, which is fascinating. It's just kind of doing its own thing. But Cancer is the sign of memory. The moon has a lot to do with memory as well. Capricorn can be a bit backward looking. It looks at tradition, it looks at convention, it looks at what have we learned, what do we know how to do, basically. So I think especially, again, probably especially since COVID, maybe particularly poignantly since the autumn, let's say, of 2024, when we had Pluto quite precisely like right here and making these same aspects to Neptune and Uranus as this new moon is. This is a pattern basically that I've gotten really used to seeing. And so it's definitely standing out to me that it's not just this new moon, it's also Mercury and Mars are really close in on this aspect pattern. Remembering maybe what life was like in the autumn of 2024. I think the world has changed quite a bit since then, and we are aware of that. But what are some of, again, the patterns of expectation that have come from this interim period of time that have gotten us feeling even more kind of stuck in the mud, especially as these planets all get later and later in the degrees, we tend to get more and more stuck in those patterns, you know? So this is what we need to release is what hasn't worked when it comes to frustrations, resentments, disappointments, looking those over and trying not to hold on to those, trying not to grasp onto those. I think forgiveness is also going to be an interesting theme to work with here. So if there is anyone, including yourself or anything that you have felt a bit stuck with forgiveness on, that you found it a bit difficult to not forget, of course, and forgiveness is a complicated matter, but if you've been struggling with that and there is something that you're wanting to let go of in that way, this would be a good time to actively try to do that, to not let that hold you back, to not let that keep you in that kind of, say, karmic tie with whatever it is that has been disappointing or that you have needed to forgive, but you haven't been able to. When we can't forgive something, in my view at least, this does keep us karmically tied to that. The extent to which we can kind of let those things go, I think the better for us, especially as we go forward. We're going to be grappling with different pros and cons. So that's what I'm kind of trying to get us ready for, is that things are going to be different. We're not going to be able to carry those expectations with us as we're moving into very different terrain, right? So unpack the backpack of all the things we don't need anymore before we start to move much more into this active mindset and active framework that we're going to be working with from 2026, pretty much right on the other side of this new moon forward. I will also say anything that has felt like you're spinning your wheels, like you haven't really been able to get it going, those kind of dreams or whatever that have felt impossible as we get into this more active stage, those things can be acted upon in a very different way, and you may gain some really good traction that you weren't quite expecting. So that's another reason why I think it's important to change our expectations going forward, because what we've been experiencing is not what we're going to be experiencing. So like I said, separating the wheat from the chaff during this period of time, keep in your backpack what's helpful: patience, emotional regulation, the ability to really put in good, clean effort, to really pour your heart into something before expecting a reward. We'll probably see those rewards quicker going forward, but patience is always helpful to have. And then again, with all of these planets and these Saturn-ruled signs, especially as I mentioned in the Aquarius stellium video, that's just on the other side of this, but that I did beforehand so that we can prepare for it a bit more intently. This is all about, again, finding that traction, finding the leverage to be able to move forward as we're taking action. So clarifying what we truly value and what we've learned about our values over the past several years, and redoubling our efforts to those ends. So what is real and meaningful for you, and what aspect of that has basically been clarified over the past several years, and then making the adjustments to the new realities that, again, I am very confident that it's not just early in the month, that the triple conjunction that I also did a video about, I think right at the end of November or early December, where we have this really close conjunction of the Sun and Venus and Mars, which is pretty rare and kind of weird to be experiencing. That kicked off some stuff. I'm confident that it's going to continue to be kicking things off all the way up until this new moon. So there already are some new realities that we're dealing with, trying to make those adjustments. That's one thing I really want to emphasize for the year going forward, as well as we start to get more active, is that we won't be as stuck in the mud. So that's great, right? So that's a con that we're releasing, but we're going to have to be making adjustments faster. So you can look at that as a pro or a con, there's pluses and minuses to that, but we are going to need to be a bit quicker on our feet when it comes to adjusting to new realities, because we're about to get phased into a bunch of stuff that's not super familiar. So in terms of those practical adjustments right now under this new moon in Capricorn, what's interesting about this alignment is that we're tied in very closely, in particular with this. We've got 26, 26, 28, 28. That does, even out to about 27 degrees here. And then we have 27 degrees at Uranus. Neptune is very relevant here, without a doubt. And especially in particular due to what it's doing to Saturn, which is the ruler of all of these planets, because these are in signs that are traditionally ruled by Saturn. So all of this is looking to Saturn for guidance, but Saturn is under the waves, under the deep, basically, of Neptune, and it can struggle under that kind of energy a bit. So it's definitely relevant, but what Saturn and Uranus do together is they negotiate strategy. They negotiate a system and a framework. Saturn's going to try to slow down any sort of changes to the framework that's going on, but Uranus itself is going to be encouraging changes. So during this moment, the adjustments that we can make are likely to be somewhat minor, but certainly meaningful and structural, very practical. What is the plan going forward? You can tweak that during this period of time, again, to adjust to new realities that are coming up and try and get out ahead of them a bit. So there is this structural flexibility to this period of time as well, where we're very willing not to just jump into whatever it is. You know, this is, again, still very practical and grounded with all of this Saturn-ruled stuff going on here. But there is a willingness to consider different, still pragmatic options. So we're looking through, we're trying to figure out what our strategy is going forward, but we're not just leaping into things. You know, we're still taking a pretty grounded approach here, which I think is helpful. So that helps us then to envision what kind of structures we might be able to work with going forward as the pace starts to pick up. And with these new realities really clearly in mind. This decan of Capricorn is represented by the Four of Pentacles. And so if you know tarot, then that should be somewhat helpful. The advice typically with the Four of Pentacles is going to be along the lines of try not to grip onto too much. Yes, be security minded. That's great. And yeah, collect things up. That's wonderful. But the resources that we hold on to, there's a diminishing return on investment to gripping onto things. You know, we can collect things up, but there's a point at which things just become a bit too heavy and too rigid, and they wind up, holding us in, and they wind up having us just trying to reach for, okay, can I maintain stability rather than looking toward a sense of growth? There's a lot of that energy here, which is quite interesting. In particular as well, we're going to talk about that Mercury-Mars conjunction, which is really close. And that also speaks to me in Capricorn, definitely to a Four of Pentacles kind of thing, where we're a bit too locked in and we're kind of caging ourselves in terms of what we think we can do. It's overly cautious and for fear of loss, and yet it's not taking into consideration growth potential, right? But if we are willing to take on that flexibility that, again, is typically the advice when you wind up pulling the Four of Pentacles, generally speaking, we should be able to reprioritize here. Now, also on a collective level, when we're talking about like social movements and collectivities and working together toward a better future for all of us, also, I think that social movements and community organization is going to be favored by this new moon as well. We may see some initiatives kick off here. We're also coming into that Aquarius stellium that I think is also going to be quite favorable to kicking off community efforts and things like this. And the reason that I say that is that we do have the change agent of Uranus that this is tapped into. We have a new moon here that does speak to new beginnings. Again, it's a bit conservative. It's a bit holding back and not getting, too overly excited. Although there is a lot of really passionate energy here, there may be some element to that. But the fact that Saturn is at the apex here too, it's like building something up, building toward change. And so I would say like reform-oriented collective movements, trying to meet people's resource needs. So the kind of bottom of the pyramid needs when it comes to food banks, when it comes to connecting with people on a local level, shelter, warmth, all of this kind of stuff, the basic resources that people need. I think that this is going to be quite compassionate to that. And it's also going to be helpful to people who are trying to realize that or see that in their own communities as well. So speaking again to this Mercury-Mars conjunction, which is very fascinating that's going on here, Mars is exalted anywhere that it is in Capricorn. It's exalted in this sign, but its degree of highest exaltation is 28 degrees of Capricorn, which is where that new moon is. So there is a martial nature to this, and we're going to have to discuss that when it comes to the global considerations here, certainly. But Mars and Mercury together in Capricorn can definitely be representative of commanding language. So stating one's case very plainly, very directly, and very forcefully, we're likely to see some very strong statements coming out of here. So, at the least, we get strongly worded letters, which, hopefully we're going to get more than that out of this. But this also does have to do with rules and demands and things like this. So hopefully that's not a one-way street. Hopefully that's not just top down. We can definitely wind up encountering this with bosses or family members. People are going to be speaking quite forcefully. So that is something, for one thing, to keep in mind, maybe be a little bit patient with, maybe try to point out to people if they are being almost domineering in their language, right? Or overly authority wielding. Demands are also likely to be relatively straightforward here too. So our priorities, our standards, our expectations are much clarified during this moment. And there is, for sure, a really strong emphasis with that conjunction on laws and regulations and authority in the world as well. But we may see people emphasizing rules and regulations and things, again, within workplaces or within communities or within families. I'm thinking of like the whole, as long as you're living under my roof kind of thing. It can also come through on that level as well. There is the potential for harmful words and rhetoric, threats, challenging language as well with this. Hopefully we don't encounter this too much in our own lives, but we certainly could. People saying things that are not so nice, or even trying to control what people are allowed to say, or even what people are allowed to think. So certainly on the global stage, but maybe even in our own personal lives, where we're kind of getting censured for just speaking our minds. Another thing that winds up coming through with Mercury-Mars conjunctions like this, again, especially in Capricorn, is the ability to focus. So when it comes to our minds, our thoughts, our words, our ability to articulate things, like I said, it's going to be kind of cut and dry, very straightforward. But again, if there's something that you're needing to organize, that you're needing to reprioritize, that you're needing to plan, that you're needing to strategize around, if there's a budget that you need to move, things around in, all of that is very much favored by this, and you should be able to see that through during this period of time as well. But that also does emphasize military strategy and things like this. So finally, I also want to talk about this on a global level. And one thing that's weird here is that we have Saturn under a strange amount of pressure, and it's in definitely a very weakened state. So when it comes to institutions and things like this, structures, convention, the status quo, that is going to be under a lot of pressure. And I don't think that it's going to be the prettiest thing to see in the world. I think that this is all feeding into the Aquarius stellium that I didn't have the kindest words for. We can get some good stuff out of it, but I think on the global stage, it's not going to look the nicest. But basically what we have here, if you are familiar with astrological midpoints, we have Saturn at the midpoint of Mars and Uranus in addition to these other planets. But the combination of those three can be quite rough. And Mars and Uranus are both very destabilizing energies. And when they are putting their pressure to change something and to disrupt something, to break something down, to pull it apart, even potentially to weaponize something, the status quo, convention, laws, regulations, authority, things like this, that is putting a huge amount of pressure on all that Saturn represents, which again is going to be the status quo, regulations, laws, the way that things stand, the way that things have always been done, institutions, governments, corporations, banks, things like this, even the law itself. So that is likely to be used to weird ends during this period of time, and it's also likely to have its structure break down a bit more than we've seen. This is a longer process, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, of all that can break down of Saturn and its structures. They will. Neptune will absolutely do that in that conjunction to Saturn. And this happens every 36 years or so, is that there is an old order that breaks apart, old narratives, old conventions, old ways of doing things that come apart. And then we need to imagine a different way forward with Neptune and then build it up with Saturn as Saturn starts to separate from that conjunction. So this is a broader thing that we've been dealing with increasingly since March of 2023, when Saturn joined Neptune in Pisces. It's going to reach its apex, its height, on February 20th of 2026, but it's going to stick with us as well as an energy of breaking things down and rebuilding a new way forward all the way until 2028. So we're almost at that peak there. And we have Mars and Uranus putting extra pressure on that much weakened structure of Saturn. You can think of this as an old dam, right? We'll especially in Pisces, we'll call Saturn like a dam that's there, that's very old and isn't really serving much purpose anymore. And all the water of Neptune is wearing away at it, wearing away. Maybe there are even storms that have weakened that surface quite a bit more in terms of the water pressure. And then understanding that that structure is no longer really serving any purpose, people start coming with tools and trying to break down that dam. At a certain point, it's going to give, you know? So this is just more kind of hammering away at that, with Mars and Uranus both applying their pressure onto the structure to change. So Saturn is overwhelmed and under really extreme pressure during this whole broader period of time. That's going to be super loud. I would say all the way until the Aries stellium that we're going to get in April, which I'm going to be talking about as well. It's going to be a lot for Saturn. We're going to see a lot of institutions not be able to hold up under the pressure here. So a big, strong sense of strain and burden during this period of time. Definite clear indications of some breakdown, be it institutional, potentially even financial or budgetary, things like this. And as these structures tend to break down, there are power grabs that wind up taking place. And that's something we're likely to see as these planets move into Aquarius as well. So we're likely to see a lot of that during this period of time. The remnants basically of an old world being swept away. I will say the attitude right now toward international law has me a bit concerned considering all of these alignments. It looks like that's going to be something that is very much in the sights of this institutional breakdown. And I've been discussing that for a while because of the fact that the UN and all of these international institutions, even NATO and so forth, they're all coming up for their Uranus return when Uranus goes back into Gemini again, as is the United States, you know, and all of our laws and things like that. So that is something I'm concerned about, and it does seem to be pointing in that direction, but we'll see how this winds up playing out, certainly. And again, with all of this pressure on Saturn there as well, we can see legislation that winds up reflecting these kind of restrictive attitudes of Mars in Capricorn and Uranus in Taurus, which I feel like I have overly belabored, but I'm just going to throw it out there real quick. Uranus in Taurus is historically extremely reactionary. It tends to drive up hate movements that work under the guise of conservatism. So we had Uranus and Taurus in the 1930s, during the antebellum South, and during the period of time prior to the American Revolution, the U.S. American Revolution, and then also the French and Haitian revolutions that wound up coming a bit after as well. So there's this reactionary tendency that winds up basically coming apart as Uranus moves into Gemini. It's going to look during this new moon like there's an upswing in favor of that reactionary tendency. The thing that I definitely want us to keep in mind is that that is not going to last because of the fact that this Uranus is about to go into Gemini, where things wind up changing quite a bit for the better and starts leaning a lot more toward notions of equality, imperfect as they may be. Now, also notice that there are no squares, no oppositions here. It's just this minor grand trine that we're dealing with in the sky. So during this period of time as well, leadership is temporarily facing a lot less opposition to their plans, to any sort of authorizations, to policy shifts, to strategic decisions, things like this. So they're also going to be able to articulate, leaders will, future plans. There's likely to be some new regulations, some new rules, new policies that are going to be initiated during this period of time, or at least floated during this period of time, because of the fact that leadership is feeling less caged in by rules and norms. There's not conflict here. There may be argumentation, there may be a lot of yelling about it, but there's nothing effective that people are able to do to resist during this little window of time, pretty much until later in February. Then we start to get some real shifts and things like that. So there's going to be a lot of ongoing discussion about what leaders are authorized to do, what exceeds mandates, what is too far outside of norms, what is the extent of authority, and things like this. This is also likely to center around resources with all of this earth sign stuff going on. So with Uranus and Taurus and all of these planets in Capricorn, this is about the resources and what the plan is to do with those resources. And through that process with the sun in particular in a trine to Uranus, there's going to be some light shed on what that Uranus and Taurus represents and what it has represented, which is generally powerful people kind of taking what they want without regard, even to some extent with contempt with Uranus in Taurus for those that they're taking from. So what I just described of Uranus and Taurus historically, we're likely to see more kind of mask off moments when it comes to those tendencies as well. And these revelations are likely to be embedded in budgets or questions of resource allocation. So this may look like austerity, and it may look like cuts and things like that. It may look like very, very narrowly oriented, like in-grouping and out-grouping handouts and things like that, that we're likely to see, as well perhaps of some level of corporatism as well. I don't think that any of us would be terribly surprised to see things like that. But this is going to drive up a lot of conversation around what people would like to see resources used towards. So what are our true priorities, and what aspects of there is going to be some negotiation there. And so with that Uranus in retrograde, for one thing, things that come up now that are past during this period of time are likely to be revised later on and reassessed later on. There could be some delays and limits that do wind up coming through, but I don't think that's going to be apparent quite yet as well. So I also want to speak a little bit more about the decan that this new moon is taking place in. I tend to like to look at the decan of lunations, new moons and full moons. So I think they can be quite instructive of what the theme is going to be and what some of the main characters basically are going to be. So this decan is ruled by the sun. And with the Sun-Saturn themes, with Saturn being the ruler of the sign, with Mars exalting in the sign, and then with this decan being ruled by the sun, this is very much about leaders, executive leadership, institutional leadership. This is like the pinnacle of leadership, the leader, right? And it's about the extent of their control and what they're capable of doing and what they're capable of controlling within, let's say, their realm of control and authority. What is the prerogative of the leader? So there's a negotiation of control there, and there's an attempt to assert a lot of control there as well. And what's interesting, I got this from 36 Faces by Austin Coppock. I think it's him that said this. I kind of just gathered a couple quotes that seem really weirdly on the nose to what we're seeing globally right now. But there's this quote of that this is a position of mastery over one's environment, ordering and regulating one's portion of the world. So I guess another way of saying that would be one's sphere of influence, right? There's this other quote as well that I pulled out, which says, the world's condition depends upon its regent's decree, which is also extremely imperial. So again, we're likely to see a lot of questions around the extent of one's authority and power, and very little practical resistance to overreach when it comes to that. Now, I don't think that that's necessarily going to stand for long. We have eclipse season coming up. We have all of this shifting and changing, especially that Uranus shift, especially the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is pointing to major changes that are coming up. But in this moment, I think that we're going to see some really strong imperialist attitudes coming through, and a lot of enrichment on that basis as well. Also from 36 Faces, I was able to gather some other authors ideas about this decan, where Agrippa refers to this as being covetous of money. Various versions of the Picatrix speaks to monopoly and accumulation and greed, as well as an image to destroy everything contained in the previous faces, which is interesting because that's what we're kind of going to see with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction coming up as well, is like the removal of the old world and the creation of a new world. But there is also a very, very, very high level of exaltation here that implies that a fall would be rather extreme if it were to take place. And it is usually through hubris that a fall like that can take place. And I would not rule that out. So don't think that this is only going in one direction right now. There's a lot of stuff coming up that's likely to wind up bringing this really down to size, right? There is also a theme here around prudent government as well. And so there's that dichotomy of good governance versus greedy governance, of authority versus control. And so those lines are likely to be very clearly drawn during this period of time. They should be quite visible. They may be also illuminating some weird kind of underbelly stuff to people's claim on authority and so forth, to some movements, to some ideologies with the trine to Uranus and Taurus. And what's interesting is that this is also so overreaching that it winds up calling into question whether one is actually in control. So when one gets really out of their head with hubris, they're not actually in control, even though they think that they control everything. You know, they're not even in control of themselves. And so there was this image also drawn from this decan of, you know, one can think that they are building themselves a palace, but they're actually building themselves a prison. It's a very interesting decan to have coming up in this moment in history. My takeaways from all of this is that patience, planning, self-control, responsibility, this will all in the long run wind up paying off, certainly. And those are some of the things that we should kind of keep in that backpack for ourselves, regardless of our position in the world. But that there can also be a lot of burden to being overly rigid or trying to control too much. So major cautions here around abuse of power that's likely to blow back, and resting on laurels is a possibility here, but it might allow to then kind of slip through your fingers a moment where we're able to consolidate our thoughts and our plans and our strategies such that we're able to make some really excellent adjustments going forward to get ourselves in even better positions than we're already in. So that is what I have for this new moon. Like I said, it's a weird kind of, I don't want to say it's a quiet moment, because I don't think that it will be on the global stage, but it's a moment where we in our own lives are able to really take stock, are able to consolidate, are able to let go of things and expectations that aren't really going to serve us going forward, and to make some plans and to strategize for the quick moves that we're going to start to be able to make increasingly as the year goes on, and to figure out our priorities when it comes to that. Also, any sort of reorganization you're doing, budgeting, things like that, all really well favored by this new moon as well. So with all of that said, thank you all so much for spending this time with me. Like I said, if you don't mind giving the video a thumbs up or hype, I would really greatly appreciate that. And do consider sticking around by subscribing for future videos. There is a whole heck ton of stuff that is coming up that is going to be really important to be aware of before it winds up taking place. And that's what I hope to be able to offer. And we tend to do that by looking at all of these significant transits from a collective perspective, a global perspective, and then taking that through sign by sign to see even more so how it's going to be impacting us all personally. Consider sticking around if that is of interest to you. I would love to have you here. There's information in the description box below about personal readings, as well as membership perks, weekly forecasts, monthly sessions. So if you are interested in that, definitely check that out. I do want to say, I think I have about another month of potential live readings that I'm going to be able to do before I'm going to have to limit those again to just the pre-records. So if that's something that you think you might be interested in, it would be maybe a little bit wise to kind of get on that now, because in July, August, I'm going to be making some moves again just in my region. But I'm going to have to just do the pre-record so that I can control the workflow a little bit better for that move. So just a little heads up there. There's still plenty, but it won't be long, I think, until those wind up filling up. And then it'll be probably about 2 months after that I'll then wind up reopening the readings, the live readings. But with all of that said, I do want to say thank you so much to the members of this channel for your support. So thank you so much to Angel Niblock, JJ, Michelle Howell, Deborah Keel-Leavitt, Patrick McKenney, Jody, Anne Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Rachel Windholtz, the Z-Man 1291, Aya, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, the Nelson Cat Maya, Connie DiMartino, Dolly Geezy, Mango JT, B Love, Startlingly True, Grace, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Aquarian Antiquarian, Susan Martin, Chad W, Jonathan Mason, David LaRosa, Adrienne K, SP, Teresa Jones, Sherry Leas, Horse Dog Notebook, Nioke Beam, Justice League Pie, Ashley Gonzalez, Create, Gales Tarot and Astrology, Talitha McKenzie, K from NH, Batar Music, Pat K, Nancy Imhoff, Peter Carlin, Sarah M. Cap, Angela Lazaire, Travis Dandro, Jane Bevan, Helena Fisher, MD, Tina Reynolds, Sacred Alpaca, Natasha P., Indy Loon, Susie Fetter, Linda Skull, Mehernush Amiri, Mari Garcia, D. Fish, Ellen McCormick Martins, Energetics with J, Someone 77, Attunement Tarot, J.A., Carrie Affronti, Mike, Lynn Ching, Helena Koyanik, Hiska Kuznetsova, Linda Osborne, Denise Gould, Many Stars, E.F., Nina K., Zoe, Plamena Malinova, The Muslim Researcher, Dante Hill, Cameron Walker, Larissa F., A. Neon, Marlo Murphy, Allison Arthurson, Janelle S., Danny C., Janet McCann, Gameen, CPT Alpha 12, Alina Bloomgarden, AC, Mina Dobras, NG, Sydney, Rebecca Cortez, Pat Doty, Ricky Dandridge, Brandy Williams, Allison Elliott, Lisa Newcomb, Mason HKW, Rach Angel, Nobody Important 7879, Adya Freya Willow Raven, Psychics and Mediums, MA, Parakeets or a Go, Nat Catnip, Shane V, Jesse, Aaron Pedersen, Shell Hawkins, Amanda Emmons, Brenda Tucker, This Is It, My Friend, Tracy Gerdine, Malcolm Sen, Sabrina Simon, JL, Ethereal Material, Grounded Fire, Shadow and Soul Revolution, Esther Swan, Theodora, Victoria Gordon, Corvus Cornix, Lizzie Willow, Emily Zoe, Kim Spina, Patricia Cogley, Rachel Y, Alex T, Bella, Pepe Ivanova, Ali Casanova, Ruby Payne, Valerie Hamilton, Elsie, Gabrielle Pages, Lua Baella, I think, maybe, Jody Gonzalez, Sunshine, F2NER. I don't think that's Leet Speak. I don't know how to pronounce that, if that's supposed to be pronounced in some way. Cat Alien, Nita Singh, Catherine Rose Conlu, Rebecca Fusetti, Anna Jordan, Roxette De La Cruz, I Hate 1988, Patra Ewing, Sylvia C. 605 Abel. Thank you all so much for your support. Much love to you. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have this new moon taking place in your 10th house. So this is speaking to your ambitions, your career plans, if you have a traditional career, your sense of legacy, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, basically. And there's going to be some potential for redefinition along those lines. You may be looking at budgets and income and things like this and trying to see if there's a way that you can get that to feel more in alignment with what you're truly wanting and what is truly meaningful to you. You may be really redoubling your efforts and pushing yourself pretty strongly here as well. If there's something, especially financial, that like you're trying to maybe save up for, something along those lines, something you're really wanting, or you may just be saving for a rainy day and you may find yourself really motivated basically to those ends by this new moon. There's also a focus on, like, again, self-actualization, independence, your own authority, trying to create that for yourself, especially if with the planets that have been moving through your 10th house recently, and in particular now with that conjunction of Mercury and Mars, I would be a little bit more concerned for you encountering some kind of weird use of authority around you. So that could even be something that you wind up experiencing in a workplace that causes you to desire greater independence, or to not have to deal with that anymore, to call the shots a little bit more. This could have you speaking up for a promotion that you're wanting. There's a huge amount of intention to your plans with this kind of an alignment. And so for you, all of that I was saying about what would serve really well with this, so, being very responsible, very patient, planning things out, utilizing strategy, that would be really excellent for you to focus on quite a bit, especially plans. Like when it comes to what it is that you're setting out to do, rather than allowing for that to be like, okay, day in, day out, we're just, kind of trying to get to the next week or something like that. Really focusing on what are your long-term plans? What would you really like to see in terms of your coming 5 years? This would be a really fascinating and very wonderful alignment under which to write that down in a kind of manifestation, intentional kind of a way. What are you wanting to achieve? You're about to get that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in your first house. There's going to be a lot that's in your own hands to be able to work with and deal with. So really looking at what is it going forward that's going to help you to accomplish what you're setting out to. Being certainly quite responsible to that end under this influence, taking things one step at a time, but still having that long view of what am I aiming for here? Because this could definitely be one of those quiet moments where you set that intention and you wind up building and building and building toward an achievement that comes quite a bit later. And you may even forget this moment, but there's certainly a seed that's being planted here in terms of your future and your ambitions during this period of time. But yeah, without belaboring it too much, I think that that's a lot of what's being spoken to here. Again, I did just speak about the Aquarius stellium that's just on the other side of this, and I took that through sign by sign. That can also be quite helpful to consider within this late January timeframe as well, if that is of interest to you. But I do hope that this new moon treats you super well, that you're able to set a lot of really excellent plans in place here, and I will talk to you very soon. Okay, so for Taurus, we have this new moon taking place in your 9th house. And the 9th house has to do with your personal expansion, the expansion of your mind and your experience. This can have a lot to do with spirituality and belief as well. There's also elements of travel and education and things like this, foreign places, that winds up coming through with this house. There's a lot to do with higher learning as well. So when it comes to your beliefs and your values, this can represent a major reassessment of those things. I think you're looking back over what you've believed and why. And this can help quite a bit to reassess which of those beliefs are helpful to you, which aspects of your worldview are conducive to you accomplishing what it is that you're wanting to in your own life, or feeling about yourself the way that you're wanting in your own life, and letting go of which of those beliefs are not quite serving you anymore. So a perfect example of this would be any sort of self-limiting beliefs or notions of, oh, that's too big for me. I shouldn't reach for that because I'm going to be disappointed. That whole aspect that I was speaking to in the collective reading about the fact that we're no longer really going to be limited in terms of what we're able to actuate within our own lives. So the effectiveness of our action, due to all of the passive placements that we've been dealing with in the past several years, at least 7 years, where there's been so much passive energy that we haven't really been able to get ourselves moving, that's going to pass. So those kind of self-limiting beliefs of, well, even if I try, I'm not really going to be able to get the traction that I'm looking for, so I'm just going to continue to wait it out. That's the kind of stuff that you definitely want to be releasing during this period of time. And a lot of that can come through just encouraging yourself to continue to expand, or to start to expand again if you feel like you've been kind of holding yourself in or holding yourself back. from experiencing things. So if you've been wanting to take courses, if you've been wanting to seek some kind of certification or some other higher education, or you've been wanting to travel, or even notions of going nomadic, things like that, experiencing more of the world, experiencing more of yourself, really exploring your own beliefs, I would really encourage thinking about that, planning for that. Capricorn is great at planning and strategy. So even if you feel like, oh, I can't do that, etc., this is the kind of energy that would figure out how to do that, right? Additionally, if you have the opportunity to travel throughout this period of time, you should be able to experience a sense of catharsis that could also help you to, again, kind of release, right? Let go of any sense of gripping onto the old expectations. Also through seeking new truth, seeking different kinds of perspectives. Maybe you want to go out of the usual scenes that you usually run in, or maybe you want to go outside of the usual, even like news media outlets that you typically read. Maybe you want to start exploring different areas of your city, or exploring different genres, or exploring a new topic or a new subject or a new spiritual philosophy or something, just to shake things up and to get things moving again after what's been a pretty stagnant several years for the world, basically. So making plans to try new things, to explore new avenues during this time is definitely great. Also, really redoubling your efforts toward a belief system that's very real for you, that is genuine for you, that isn't caged in, that isn't, oh, well, I have to believe this or that, or I have to take this or that kind of perspective. I would say even, especially with this in the ninth house, it was super fascinating when I moved overseas, and the amount of perspective shift that I was able to get on myself, on what was possible for me, on what was quote unquote normal, it was all really helpful. It didn't negate what I already knew. It didn't negate my, old beliefs, etc. It was very helpful to expand in that way. And it gave me all sorts of different perspectives on how things are normally done, what is normal, what I should expect, So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if just kind of reaching outside of your normal stomping grounds or what you typically do can be really cathartic and also really ultimately productive during this period of time. So I would definitely recommend it. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus, for this time around. Again, I just discussed the Aquarius stellium that's going to be building up, where we're going to have a crazy amount of planets in your 10th house. So if you're wanting to look a bit more at the end of January timeframe, that would also be quite helpful to look at. And I'll have that link in the description. But with that said, I hope this new moon treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have this new moon in Capricorn in your 8th house. And this is super fascinating to me, in part because this does look like specifically a new moon that's going to help a lot with releasing baggage, letting go of baggage, assessing and sorting out what's useful, what's not useful, especially on that kind of karmic level of what we've been stuck in for many years and what we're no longer about to be stuck in. And so what we no longer need to focus on or live in or grip onto, right? Now, this is a place where you have had Pluto for a very, very long time, from 2008 until like last year. We basically had Pluto in the 8th house. And that should have introduced a lot of weird experiences of karmic ties, of emotional bonds, moments of having to rely on trust of others quite a bit, moments of having that trust betrayed quite a bit, and sharing with others and connecting with others. And so this is a moment to look back over all of those experiences, again, to sort the wheat from the chaff in terms of what were the lessons of that, but what are some of the patterns that you picked up on that aren't really going to serve you going forward? If you know about, for instance, boundaries within intimate connections, if you know more about debts and obligations and how you can best approach those things. If you've had those weird kind of experiences with Pluto going through that area, what's interesting about that kind of thing is that, and with the eighth house in general, is that you can really just avoid a lot of eighth house complications through taking the lessons on board, because they're complicated lessons. And so if you can trust in yourself to know to do the right thing when weird stuff comes up, like maybe there is someone that you shouldn't trust or whatever. Maybe there is a karmic tie that winds up getting built up that gets kind of complicated. But you don't need to approach every connection expecting that it's going to go wonky. You don't need to approach every person thinking that they might not be trustworthy. You might not need to approach every debt as something that's going to get out of control. You might not need to look at every obligation as something that's going to become burdensome, right? So understanding that you've had those lessons, you've learned those lessons, and now being able to open yourself up to experience again and to trust yourself a lot more. So that's a real deep emotional and psychological purging right there. And it should be rather cathartic. It might be a bit emotional. That may be something that you've been experiencing over this month, is a lot of memory about connections and ties and relationships and things like that, and how that may have gotten out of hand because you've had a lot of transits through this house generally that's being like punctuated basically by this new moon. But this is a moment where you have the opportunity to let some of that stuff go. And I would think that that is something that this is really calling for quite strongly. Also, confronting any fears around loss or control, vulnerability, trusting in your own resilience. That, I think, is going to be the most critical thing going forward, because you built a lot of that with Pluto in your eighth. And that is something you can rely on. But you probably also built a lot of walls, to keep yourself safe and to not take on too many burdens from other people, to not take on all of that kind of emotional baggage quite so much. But those walls can work both ways. So trying to, with this, recognize what is a wall and what is something that you can actually work with and utilize as a really strong lesson, Guarding yourself with the lessons, not with the walls, basically, is how I would boil this down. But it is going to be looking at, again, a lot of karmic ties, debts, complications, emotional bonds, things like this that you've experienced over recent years. So I did also just discuss the Aquarius stellium that's going to be building up. If you're looking for more information about late January and what's going to be going on with all of that, that's going to be in the description box below, where we'll look at what that means in your ninth house as that continues to build. But other than that, yeah, I hope that this new moon treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have this new moon in Capricorn taking place in your seventh house. And this is the house of other people, of partnerships, of your relationships with other people. This speaks to the consolidation and deeper understanding, as well as the kind of letting go of some of the experiences that you've had in recent years in terms of your connections with people. So this can represent a turning point in a relationship or commitments, or even just how you look at relationships and commitments. I would imagine that you've had a lot of experiences recently with regard to who you can and cannot trust, and like power within relationships and things like this. Maybe giving a lot and dealing with takers, things like that, where you've probably felt the need to really, really, really clarify expectations, maybe even having put up some walls at different points when it comes to connections and relationships and things like that. And the reason for that is that for years and years, from 2008 until about last year, you had Pluto going through the seventh house. And now this new moon is coming through and pointing to that, and doing so in a way that is pretty familiar. It's probably going to be driving up some memories along those lines. But it's very much about taking with you what is useful. So taking with you the lessons around boundaries and around being willing to clarify, to yourself and feeling that it is your prerogative to decide for yourself who is reliable, to allow into your life only people who are supportive, who are mature, and who are clear in their expectations and standards, and who behave in appropriate ways, right? People who you really enjoy connecting with and that make you feel good. And that you have the right to only form partnerships that are respectful and accountable and that you feel are on equal footing and so forth. So there's a lot of lessons that you've picked up along those lines. Hopefully a real sense of understanding that that is your prerogative to be able to make all of those decisions for yourself, but maybe to let down some of the walls that have been built up in that place in order to give yourself the space to be able to sort that out without too much undue influence from other people. But if there's anyone that still needs to be kind of addressed when it comes to this, or if there is the need to internalize more so the fact that you do have, the right to have the expectations that you do in connections, to demand a kind of equal give and take, to be able to decide what it is that you want in connections and to be able to speak up for that as well, then this is a great moment to focus on that and to set intentions around that. But if you have found yourself, I think, kind of more likely having experienced a lot of those things, building up those walls, hopefully at this point being able to take the lesson and understand that you'll be able to figure out who's who and what's what and what you really want. And to be able to speak up for that for yourself, and therefore maybe to be able to open yourself up a bit more to new connections and things like that, and to build trust again, and maybe even to make some new commitments during this period, or at least to set an intention toward having the kind of connection that does really make you feel supported and respected and so forth. But yeah, that's a lot of what this new moon in Capricorn is going to be speaking to for you. Being able to have the lessons around boundaries and stuff like that and utilize those rather than having to rely upon walls built up that can keep out good things as well. Not being shy to ask for what it is that you're wanting in partnerships. Being able to separate the wheat from the chaff when it comes to the people that you're connected to. If people are holding their own, then excellent. But if they are just burdensome, maybe being able to let some people go or take a step back, knowing that that also is your prerogative to not be in connection to certain people. So yeah, I also did just cover the pile up, the stellium of planets that you're going to have in Aquarius in the most recent video. And I'll link that in the description if you're wanting a little bit more on what the end of January is going to look like. But other than that, I hope this new moon treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have this new moon in Capricorn taking place in your 6th house. Your 6th house has to do with your routines, your work habits, things like this, the extent to which your life is organized and what you have to do day to day, with emphasis on what you have to do day to day. So some aspects of your health can also come through in this house. So this is going to be pointing out and bringing your attention to your daily routines, to matters of well-being, to your responsibility, and especially to matters of like work-life balance. You may feel like you have a lot on your plate, that there's a lot of work that you've been doing, that you've been trying to sort out. And this gives you an opportunity to reprioritize a lot of that. You may even want to restructure your routine, generally speaking. So in terms of your workflows, or what is and is not your responsibility, and what is really giving you a return on investment, what's working, what's not, what kinds of habits you're wanting to have versus what kinds of habits you're finding burdensome. So taking that all really quite seriously, looking over it, and building sustainable and healthy habits that are going to help you to get things done, but also to create a sense of well-being. Also then looking at any patterns here that you're not liking. So do you tend to overwork quite a bit and therefore not take as much care of yourself as you would like to? I think a lot of us have a tendency to do that. But this would be a period of time where, again, it's about possibly just straight up writing these things down, figuring it out, sorting it out, trying to figure out like what you can do that's going to be productive, and how do you compartmentalize and create time and space for you to take care of yourself, for you to have some breathing room, for you to have some alone time. I know it's easier said than done often, but that is what this is really pointing to, is the restructuring of your work-life balance and taking that seriously. And particularly, Uranus has been transiting through your 10th house for several years at this point. And that may have been bringing your attention toward trying to do things to like the standard of other people, or trying to meet the expectations of other people. That can also be something that goes on in the 6th house. But this is much more about you defining for yourself what your priorities are, what's important, and building a sense of pride through that. So consistently working toward your goals, consistently working efficiently, consistently taking good care of yourself, consistently keeping things in balance, rather than just continually trying to meet the expectations and standards of other people. So I would definitely recommend, I think, honestly, I feel like for everyone, I would really recommend like taking out a paper and pencil and literally writing out what are the priorities here, and how do I make sure that this area of my life is structured as well as it can be, and setting some real intentions along those lines. Because I think that this is going to be a quietly very helpful new moon for us to be working with, and it's going to help us to basically organize whatever it is that we're really setting our mind to. And for you, a lot of that is going to be pointing to how do you create a greater sense of balance in your life. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra. I did just speak about the big stellium that is going to be taking place in Aquarius as we move into January even more. So if you're wanting a bit more of insight on how January is going to be going and how it's going to flow into February, definitely feel free to check that out. I will link to that in the description box. And other than that, I hope this new moon treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have this new moon in Capricorn taking place in your 5th house. And sorry, I had to move this back pretty far so that moon is quite early in the sign. I just discovered that I can change the sign that's rising without changing the time of the chart. So I'm going to do that from now on. But in the meantime, this new moon is taking place in your 5th house, and that has to do with your creative self-expression, that which you enjoy, your pleasures. This has to do with also relationships that are just pleasure-based, so friendships and romantic partnerships and things like this. Your children can also show up in this house. If you have children, or if there are children around you, there's a kind of childlike nature to this house. So this is encouraging you to take this area of life quite seriously and to focus on it quite a bit, to make sure that there is time in your life for creativity, for hobbies, for interest, for pleasures, for joys. And it's also focusing on like you speaking for yourself, you saying what it is that you need to say, with Mercury and Mars conjoined with this new moon as well. So being willing to create time and space for yourself, being willing to pursue that which you genuinely deeply want, and also being very willing to not just create time for the enjoyment of activities, but there may even be something that you're trying to perfect here, that you are trying to hone in terms of skills or talents, or there may be a passion project that you're really wanting to invest a lot of energy and time into. And so this is really encouraging the heck out of that. And it's also speaking to like what aspects of your self-expression are needing to be released. There can be, again, with all of the recent passive energy that we've been dealing with in recent years, you may have found a way to make your voice kind of acceptable to other people, to like try and cheer people up, or to try to be cheerful, for the sake of other people and not because that's genuinely what you're feeling. So when it comes to other people's standards or social expectations, things like this, so not needing to experience joy in a way that is validated by the outside, but in a way that is really authentic and deeply felt by you, that's very real for you. So releasing any sort of performative joy or performative happiness that is intended to make other people feel comfortable or feel good, and therefore opening the doors for you to be able to experience your emotions as they genuinely are, and not looking outside of yourself for the validation of what you love, be it your hobbies, be it a genre. Like I'm even thinking about sometimes we don't share the books that we love or the music that we love because we think we're going to be judged. This is just basically saying, no, take very seriously what you enjoy and take that enjoyment itself very seriously as well, and try to make more room and more time for that in your life too. Now, if you are a creative type or there's something that you're trying to create, generally speaking, this is also very supportive and conducive of all of that. So creating from a place, possibly like a fresh place, maybe you're even wanting to, if you have some hobby that is based in an area, like if you have a work bench or something like that, you may be wanting to reorganize that or restructure that so that you're able to feel more comfortable doing that. I would say even if there's an investment that is required with that kind of, maybe you're wanting to create a workspace for you when it comes to your passions and hobbies and things like that, this kind of thing would definitely encourage that. But then to, again, not look outside of yourself for validation, but create what you're truly wanting to see, so creating from a place of real authenticity, committing yourself to it as well, and doing so in a way that is very respectful of your own vision and of your own joy and of your own heart. So really creating from a space where you're able to pour your heart into things because you're not holding back. So I think that that's a lot of what I would want to speak to when it comes to this. Also being really authentic in your friendships and pleasure connections and things like that. When it comes to your children, this can be letting bygones be bygones, trying to move forward in a fresh energy, to be really encouraging to them as well, and to try and create more time for that connection, to develop that connection. But yeah, I did just also speak to the Aquarius stellium that's going to be coming up later in the month, like right on the other side of this new moon as well. So if you're wanting a little bit more insight into late January into early February and what that's going to be looking like for you, definitely feel free to check that out. I will link to that in the description. But other than that, I hope that this new moon treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have the new moon in Capricorn is taking place in your fourth house. And your fourth house has to do with your home and your family and your emotional core. So this is an area where you recently, until last year, from 2008 until last year, had Pluto moving through. And so I would imagine that there were a lot of experiences of power dynamics and complications and difficult experiences and circumstances that you may have gotten really used to and that you may have built some muscle memory around. And that is what I think this new moon is speaking to quite a bit, is the need to potentially release some of that muscle memory around expecting for things to be complicated, expecting for things to pose a difficulty or a challenge or something like this, especially for you when it comes to your home and your family situation and your emotional core. So you may have felt like this is an area where you need to put in so much effort to see any result from. So when it comes to your emotional well-being or feeling secure, you may have felt like, oh, I need to like save just to get a really solid foundation under myself, just to feel safe and secure. Or you may have felt like your home, your literal home, has required so much work and maybe due to people who were complicated being in your home. And so maybe there has been like trying to feel safe and secure in your home has required a lot of work because you've needed to like compartmentalize quite strongly. There may have been complications with your family and you're kind of expecting for that to continue to be complicated. That has shifted to some extent. And this new moon, I think, is coming through to point out to you, to have you remember where some of that came from and why you might have some of those patterns there. And trying to encourage you to certainly take the lessons with you and to take the good habits and patterns and things like that that you've developed through that adversity, take those with you, but not necessarily the continued expectation or the pattern of thinking that you're going to need to put a whole bunch of effort into something, or you're going to need to struggle through in this area, you know? So really confronting also any sort of inherited patterns. So family patterns, family dynamics that you've probably picked up on, that you probably learned about and uncovered in the past several years, and those family dynamics and things like that. You've probably uncovered those. You probably have learned to cope with them. This is less about coping with it and more about, okay, now that you know that that's there, you can put those walls up as necessary, but maybe not feel the need to play small and cage yourself in order to not like provoke a reaction or something like this. Just as an example, you know, so when it comes to any sort of rigidity that has been built up in this area to kind of protect you from that Pluto transit as it, you know, move through that area. This is about recognizing you know how to deal with this area now. And so you can give into this kind of cathartic release related to that conditioning or those expectations or past experiences and so forth. So trying to deeply release, and maybe you have experienced many, many, many layers of cathartic release of inherited patterns or weird family dynamics or conditioning or things like that. And this is coming through to just point out, it may be even that release, maybe you can even leave that pattern behind. Maybe there's been enough release along these lines, and you don't need to continue to push and push and push in that area, you know. I think there is an encouragement to like not burden ourselves as much with this area of our lives. So then really redefining from that area in terms of the planning aspect of this and the strategy aspect of this to go forward in a healthier and more satisfying way, redefining to yourself what your own safety and stability truly means. Now, does that mean that, you know, when it comes to the financial aspects of that and even the emotional aspects, that's just going to be easy to come by? I think relatively so, probably, you know, with Pluto having moved on to a more helpful area of your life. But now that you have looked at this from so many different angles, and now that you're in a space where you can call the shots a bit more, with Pluto having taught you how to do that and then moving on, you should have the ability to define for yourself what this means and what that looks like, and to plan to build that up for yourself as well. So building that inner sense of safety, stability, authority on a very grounded and very personal, really sense of authority over your own self and over your own home life, your own family life, and holding your own when it comes to that. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra. So I did just speak to when all of these planets move on into Aquarius a bit later in the month. So if you're looking for some more insight on later into January and then into February, what to expect, I will link to that in the description under the heading of the Aquarius stellium that's coming up. But I do hope that this new moon treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have this new moon in Capricorn taking place in your third house. And this is the place of your connections to the people, places, things around you, the familiar environment, your community, your communication. This also has some to do with learning and connecting with people. So this is going to be encouraging you to take that quite seriously and to look at any sort of habits or patterns that have been built up along these lines. There may be some muscle memory there from Pluto around expecting for this to be complicated, maybe expecting for a need to maybe over-explain yourself, or maybe needing to focus extra hard to learn something, or maybe feeling the need to like rigidly control your mental responses, like your thought processes, in order to maintain your sense of mood, because maybe there were some weird experiences that you've had in the past several years that have kind of put some walls up, or that you felt the need to really, really, really strongly compartmentalize or something like this. So those things can get us into these habits and into these patterns. And this new moon is encouraging you to really look at what's built up in that third house. Again, community, communications, exchange with others, your local environment, that which is familiar, and your mind. And looking for any areas where that has become overly rigid, and then releasing those things with the understanding that you have gained a lot of really solid lessons, and you've learned probably a lot of very helpful habits, but some of them are superfluous at this point and could be better dealt with by just kind of letting them go. Now, some of this may have even inhibited your speaking. You may have you may feel complicated relationship with what you're willing to say and to whom, because you may feel like, oh, it wasn't worth it to speak up in certain situations. And in other situations, I felt the need to speak very, very, very clearly and forcefully in order to get my point across. This is going to also potentially have you looking at how your communication style has changed over the past several years, and what aspects of that is going to be helpful going forward, and what aspects of it are not going to be helpful going forward. Again, I think for a lot of us, it's going to be these rigidities that we've built up, these, like for you, probably especially situations in which you feel like it's not really worth it to speak up. We should all have the ability to say what's on our mind in a lot of different situations. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is kind of reinforcing to you the value of speaking up for yourself, and just not even for yourself, but just saying what you're wanting to say in a given situation and not expecting some kind of weird dynamics to come out of that, or weird reactions or whatever it is, but rather speaking very intentionally and very honestly and authentically and with a lot of integrity, and just representing yourself through your voice in a really honest way. So any sort of limiting narratives or internalized beliefs about yourself, about your thought process, about your intelligence, about how people are going to, again, respond to what it is that you're saying, letting those things go through this period of time. And you may want to intentionally write, or intentionally have dialogue, intentionally speak your mind, in order to try to build up that new pattern of, wait, I can be a little bit more open with my thoughts, and I can communicate them and not hold them in quite as much, so you may actually want to intentionally engage with expression through this time in order to play with this new way of going forward with that. And fortunately, again, the Pluto transit that you had going through that house from 2008 until about last year, I'm sure that strengthened your mind and your communication style in some ways, but it also would have made it a bit more complicated, or a little bit more convoluted in other ways. And so through recognizing the strengths that it's brought, but then also recognizing some of the burden or baggage that it wound up bringing with it as well, and releasing those things, this can help you then to set an intention to develop an even stronger and more disciplined mindset. And again, to reinforce the honesty, the clarity, the integrity that you speak with and that you connect with people with as well. So yeah, claiming a sense of authority for yourself in your community, I think, is going to be a big aspect of this. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio, when it comes to this new moon. So I did recently just speak to what to expect with the Aquarius stellium that's coming up later in the month. So if you're wanting some insights into late January and early February, that will be under the heading of like Aquarius stellium. I'll put that video in the description box below. But otherwise than that, I hope this new moon treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have the new moon in Capricorn taking place in your second house. And this is the house of your personal resources. This is generally your money, your income, your possessions, as well as your sense of safety and security on a personal level and comfort and how you create that for yourself. So this is going to be speaking to a major reassessment along these lines, trying to strategize and plan your way forward when it comes to these things, but not from the potentially rigid ways that have become patterned in the years prior, where you had Pluto going through this house for a long time. So Pluto going through that house probably had a lot of weird experiences with your possessions and with your income and things like that, both for good and bad, but it can really keep you on your toes. And this is likely to have you, it's going to present you with an opportunity to really look over what of the lessons, what of those experiences were really helpful and useful in terms of the habits and patterns that they set into motion, and which feel like they are inhibiting growth, or that have you feeling at all kind of stuck, or like you have this kind of pattern of expectation of not being able to like really reach as far as you would like to. So when it comes to self-worth and values and things like this, any self-limiting beliefs, I would imagine those are going to be able to have you kind of sweep those aside if you set your intentions to do so. So when it comes to your long-term security and your resources, again, this gives you the opportunity to plan that forward, but it also gives you the access to your memory around how patterns have built up to be able to release and not let get in the way any that you picked up in recent years is basically what I'm getting at. So yeah, releasing scarcity mindsets or self-doubt around value, not just when it comes to material resources that you own or income or things like that, but the value of what you bring to the table. And also your prerogative to be able to set out for yourself what you truly value and to be able to define that and redefine that on your own. That shouldn't have to be subject to the validation of other people. I know that we live in a society that makes that, a lot easier said than done, but being able to define for yourself, what is it that you're wanting to invest in? What is it that you're wanting to create for yourself in terms of your comforts and environment, safety and security and so forth? And how do you get there, rather than how do you maintain what's expected of you and then try from that priority set to get to where you're wanting to go? Rather cutting out the priorities of other people when it comes to your own resources and things like that. So yeah, clarity around what is truly worth investing in and what you're really wanting for yourself. And also an opportunity to look at matters of self-reliance and self-trust and how you're able to build those up, build your confidence in yourself and your ability to take care of yourself and, come what may, stand on your own 2 feet and get yourself to where you're wanting to go, to create the comforts that you're wanting for yourself through your own consistent effort, right? That way you are able to very much call the shots for yourself, and you're not needing to worry so much about whether or not your material priorities are in alignment with that of other people, right? So really trying to lay out for yourself, what are your plans? What is your strategy going forward? What's really important to you in terms of what you genuinely value and want to invest in and want to create more of in your own life? What is the value of what you're bringing to the table? And how can you release any outside kind of imposed standards and expectations of yourself in order to not be bogged down by those kinds of things any more than is absolutely necessary? So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you when it comes to this new moon in Capricorn. So I did discuss the stellium that's going to be building up on the other side of this in Aquarius recently. And so I'll link to that in the description below if you're wanting a little more insight on how January into February is going to be feeling for you as these planets move into your third house from your second house. But other than that, yeah, like I said, I hope this new moon treats you well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have this new moon in Capricorn taking place in your first house. So this is the house of you, yourself, how you relate to the world, how you envision yourself, your own personal goals. So really all about you. And this is calling for you to feel free to redefine yourself for yourself, to release any notions of outside expectations of you, not to the point where, you're stepping on toes and being jerky or anything like that, but releasing the sense of an imposition of what you should be that is imposed from the outside. The reason I say this is really speaking to the fact that Pluto was recently going through this house from like 2008 to 2025. And there were a lot of habits that were built up along that whole period of time. And that can really feel like, for one thing, you're building up your own muscles around being yourself and asserting yourself and owning your own sense of power and authority over yourself. But that can come with a whole bunch of other patterns and habits that are built up around trying not to trigger complicated responses and reactions from other people, or trying not to go too far with certain things, or trying not to get your hopes up too high about certain things. This is about releasing those aspects of the patterns and habits that you have personally built up when it comes to how you see yourself, how you relate to other people, and your own personal goals that are only going to hold you back as you're going forward. Again, really looking at all of the patterns that you've built over recent years and enabling yourself, giving yourself permission and clarity to try to let some of those things go now as you're moving into a more active phase in life. So defining for yourself who you are, how you relate, what is your responsibility, what is your prerogative, reclaiming authority over your own life, your own personal goals, and what it is that you are trying to achieve and who it is that you're trying to be in your life, and taking your sense of identity quite seriously. And also looking at it from a place of like intentionality. I wouldn't be shy to be writing out your personal goals around this period of time and push them a little further than you've gotten used to doing. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see those things coming through in a way that you haven't quite experienced for some time. Also, the boundaries that you've built up, I'm sure that some of those have been incredibly helpful and meaningful and useful to you in recent years. But some of those may be keeping some experiences out that you're actually wanting to have. And so trusting in yourself to know when you're going to need to have those walls up and allow yourself to be flexible with them. So allow yourself to put down that guard a little bit more and maybe to create new habits around when your guard is up and when it's down. So this is really about creating a more authentic version of yourself, using what you've learned, but releasing the limits that have been developed or imposed either by you trying not to get your hopes too high or by other people with their expectations. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you with this new moon. I think it's going to be weirdly cathartic. I think it is something that you can definitely utilize and get your hands on, especially if you are intentionally planning about next steps and what you're wanting for yourself. So I would definitely recommend doing that. I also did just do a video about the Aquarius stellium that's going to be building up in your second house. So if you're wanting a little more insight on how your end of January, beginning of February timeframe is going to be going, feel free to check that out. That'll be in the description under the heading of the Aquarius stellium video. And other than that, I hope that this new moon treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, we have this new moon in Capricorn taking place in your 12th house. And your 12th house has to do with your subconscious, as well as things that are hidden, the time that you spend alone on your own inner world, your own internal experiences. And so this is already a place where patterns and habits can build up, especially outside of our awareness. So this is an opportunity to look at, especially with Pluto having recently gone through that house, any patterns or habits that you've built up that aren't helpful for you going forward, that don't feel really authentic, that feel like maybe they're holding you back or holding you in. If there's been any aspects of what's going on inside of you that you've been wanting to not really confront, there's an opportunity to look at all of this and with a lot of intentionality, try to look at what patterns and habits have been built up that are really helpful for you and take stock of those, and then to release the things, let go of the things that are no longer going to be helpful for you. With Pluto moving into your first house and telling you that you can have a lot more than you would think, or that you can approach life in a much more active, direct way, and that you can have a lot more control over the overt experience of your life. So confronting any of those unconscious patterns or fears, especially any sort of self-sabotaging habits or coping mechanisms that are not quite helpful. So trying to take stock of all of that, I would say even writing these things down, maybe journaling these things, could be really helpful in order to name them so that you can be more aware of them and bring them more into your conscious mind rather than just your subconscious, which is where a lot of these things tend to stay. So there is a really strong opportunity here for major emotional cathartic release, recognizing and letting go any sort of like rigid cages that we've created for ourselves. If you've become way more introverted in recent years, that may also be something that you want to look at as to why that is. And is there maybe some level of expectation when it comes to that of, oh, people are going to respond strangely, or I'm not going to enjoy it, or I'm going to feel uncomfortable, all of those kinds of ways that we can cope by not being extroverted or whatever. Also, this is really helpful for spiritual practice and karmic practice. So trying to intentionally look at any sort of karmic ties or karmic patterning, again, taking stock of that, trying to approach that in a different way going forward, in a way that is more authentic and more intentional. This can also speak to just working productively and quietly behind the scenes. When it comes to your inner world, this is very, very, very helpful for you being able to work on that. So again, like I said, like the emotional or subconscious patterns, the psychological patterns, all of this, if you're working on that, if you're working on healing, all of that, this is really helpful for putting you in touch with that and helping to create a new start along those lines, releasing, renewing through a sense of closure, through a sense of letting things go, closing the door on some things. I would also recommend using this period of time for just rest and reflection. This is a new moon that gives you a lot of permission to just kind of go within, to quiet down, to maybe even meditate, maybe journaling, and not pushing and pushing and pushing yourself too much. There's going to be time for that pretty much on the other side of this new moon. And I am covering that, or I did cover that in the most recent video where I discussed the Aquarius stellium that's going to be building up in your first house. So if you are wanting a bit more insight into your late January, early February timeframe and what to expect, there's going to be a link in the description below under the heading of the Aquarius stellium if you are wanting to dig into that. But other than that, I hope that this new moon in Capricorn treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Pisces, we have this new moon in Capricorn taking place in your 11th house. And this has to do with your social connections, so social groups that you belong to, friendships, people who you are connected to, people that you work with toward common goals, society, generally speaking. So there's a lot in this house about social expectation. And I would imagine that this is part of what's going to be really important about this transit for you. is looking at taking stock of and releasing, letting go of any draining social ties or social expectations. So what is it in your social life that has felt good, that has been quite encouraging, that has been helping you to grow? And what of that has kept you safe, but may have been keeping you kind of small as well? So where is it that you feel like you've needed to be, I hate to say inauthentic, but kind of, where is it that you have felt the pressure of social expectations over the past many years? You recently had Pluto moving through your 11th house, and that can have the sense of the imposition of social expectations on you, or other people needing things and feeling the need to meet those needs. This is about reclaiming those patterns and those habits, taking with you what has been helpful, and then releasing what is going to have you feel like you can't just be yourself and go after what it is that you're wanting, right? So there's that whole aspect to this transit that I think is going to be quite important. What are the social expectations? How have those patterns built up? How have they been helpful? How have they not? And then responding and strategizing and planning accordingly. This is also a house of aspiration as well, and future plans, your social role and your social status in some sense. So when it comes to your plans about what kind of life and lifestyle you're trying to create for yourself, what kind of role you're trying to create for yourself, this is also really encouraging you to take that very seriously and to release any sort of self-limiting beliefs also along those lines. So what is it that you might be convinced is outside of your reach? Really looking at that and asking yourself, is it really outside of your reach? Especially if you were to let go of social expectations that are imposed from the outside, would you maybe have more bandwidth to be able to push yourself further along the lines of what you're truly wanting for yourself? Because this new moon is so strategy oriented and it's so practical, you should be able to create those plans in a very grounded way, to be really realistic about that, and yet to be really authentic about what it is that you're wanting to create and build for yourself going forward. Again, especially when it comes to your social role, your lifestyle, your aspirations for yourself, and then redoubling your efforts toward what's actually going to help you to achieve that. So what your long-term vision is, the type of roles that you're wanting to take on. So are you looking for a leadership position? Are you looking for the ability to go independent or to really represent yourself, to not feel like you need to represent something else, maybe a different company or a certain group of people? This is about freeing yourself from those kinds of restraints and redoubling those efforts in an efficient way toward what you're actually truly wanting, you know? So I would definitely recommend during this period of time, redefining what you feel like your purpose is, especially when it comes to any roles that you've taken on. If any of those feel authentic or burdensome, really consider releasing those kinds of things. And through this process of sweeping away some unnecessary social expectations, redefining for yourself as well what it means for you to belong. If you're able to fit in, but you're not really feeling able to be yourself, then do you really have a sense of belonging, maybe within a specific social group or a certain social dynamic? Maybe this is with colleagues, maybe this is within your field. How is it that you feel like you can be more authentically yourself and that you can really honor who you truly are while remaining social and while genuinely feeling like you belong when it comes to the social groups that you belong to? Now, you are also about to go into a bit more of an introspective period of time on the other side of this new moon, when we get the Aquarius stellium building up more and more. So if you're looking for some insight on how things are going to be unfolding in later January and into February, I will link to that in the description below under the heading of the Aquarius stellium. And other than that, I hope that this new moon treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me.